Right. Good morning, everyone,
Good
and
morning. Good
Morning.
morning.
thank you all for letting me benefit from your expertise with Zoom. We are here to talk about Case Study Chapter 29, A Community of Teachers. Let's see. All right, and these are our names, of course. Everyone knows everybody. And this is the first question for our case study. What guidelines could Donna have provided for the teachers prior to the grade meetings? What could the principal have done prior to the meeting?
We'll start us out. So, in looking at some research and a couple different things, I think some things that would have been good was clearly define goals of the observation process so that they know what to expect. Also determining if it's evaluative or formative, which I think the case study kind of wanted it to be more formative, to provide positive feedback and let the teachers know some things they could improve on. I also thought about like making sure that they knew the aspects that the observer was looking for, because in doing observations myself, it's hard to look for everything at one time. So some things like are you looking at classroom management, are you looking at the instructional strategies, are you looking at student engagement, things like that, because I think that's really helpful so that they can hone in on those things that people are looking for. I also maybe said provide some kind of template. I know that the principal wanted them to kind of come up with their own things, but I think giving them better guidance, they could still come up with their own pieces of that, but everybody would kind of be on the same board, as far as that. And I even said, like, similar to Marzano's 9 high yield strategies, providing some kind of template like that, and then they could tweak it based on their grade level and things like that. Yeah, and that's kind of what I talked about.
Okay. So I had a few things that were similar to you, Megan. When I did my research for the APTEL, I went to UBN, and you were talking about summative versus formative, and I agree. I think that the case study wanted it to be more formative, and I think a lot of times it's more summative, where we should be looking at pieces throughout the school year more often and different pieces. So I had found some research from Marzano that talked about 6 recommendations for evaluation, and he talked about pulling from multiple sources. So Donna could have used Marzano's checklist, and I like the idea of a template, so maybe combining some things there, and got some feedback on that. And then I was curious what my district policy was, and there is actually several things in there about using rubrics, informal observations, which they do, conferences, reviewing grade books and lesson plans, and also the interactions, the day-to-day interactions with teachers and what they're doing outside of the classroom. So I think if they looked at it more formative, I think they'd get a better picture of the effectiveness of the teachers. And I'm good.
Right. Set my timer for myself. All right. So in reference to like the guidelines given before the grade level meetings, I felt like Donna could have been very clear about the purpose of the meeting and how it was to, sometimes you have to be very explicit about the fact that we're trying to grow them through a form of collaboration, as opposed to it coming off like it's punitive, because sometimes teachers can feel that. Bandura kind of references, when you make it clear that this is not something punitive to be an I got you, it puts you in a way of building efficacy, right? Which is something that the research says you want to do. I think that to make sure that the feedback is confidential, like just having that guideline stated on the front end as well. If you do that, then that just goes right into the first one, right? Like, okay, you're not trying to get me because this feedback is only going to be accessible to the people that need to see it. And so, you know, that's Ravitch and his building a trusting, safe culture that, you know, is necessary for teachers to feel like they're in a place where they can grow. Because if it's confidential, then we can be honest. We don't have to worry about outside entities making me feel like I have to be on guard. And then assigning roles. I thought that would have been a good guideline to kind of create equal buy-in and placement within those types of meetings, right? There's no power imbalances if you have established roles already. And Hammond kind of talks about that as well. You know, you want the fairness amongst the group. And that's my time right there.
Okay. And of course, as I looked at the case, when I first read it, I read that she had been there, and she meaning the principal, Donna Harrington, for 15 years. So that immediately struck me. Was something going on in the culture that made her feel like she needed to gain the teacher's trust for some reason? What was missing in 15 years? Because by now, in 15 years, we shouldn't be having this conversation. So something to me happened. I'm not sure what that was. But when I think about this, and we're talking about the goal of teaching is to make sure that student outcomes are positive and that academic achievement is happening, we should have, or she should have, focused on what the student data was first. Because if we look at the student data and we see where the gaps are, then now we're looking at our processes and it doesn't become personal. It becomes, how do we help the students get what they need? I think, had she made more strides in looking at the data and coming up again with a plan, just like we did the growth plan, you would have to start off with data. You would have to start off with some kind of literature review. So when we look at Hattie and we look at Ubben, thinking about how teachers need to perform to make sure engagement is happening. It doesn't become personal. It's no longer your work. It's how does students learn best. And so you are actually cultivating your craft to make sure that students get what they need.
Oh, right on the money.
Okay. Question number 2. How could the teacher's final plans be effective for the instructional process? So how could we make sure that the teacher's final plans were effective for instructional processes, for the instructional process?
So looking at some of the research that I did, some big things that stuck out to me were their final plan should include a reflection on strengths, areas for improvement. Again, not punitive in the fact that you're observing them to go telling the principal what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. It's more of like, hey, try this. This might work better in your classroom. So, and make a plan for future like professional development, things like that, that could be beneficial to the teacher that's being observed or to multiple teachers. I also looked at looking at reviewing the instructional materials that a teacher uses. So maybe some things could be tweaked there, or as a school or as a district, you could look at different materials. If something's not working, change it. Also, analyzing the student data is a big thing, and then gathering feedback from everyone. So I think those are really important for it to be effective. I think inviting teachers to observe other teachers is very valuable, and also reflecting on that with the teachers that you're observing, not just, okay, I came in, I'm done, here's my report. I think it's really important to talk with them and reflect. And that's what I found.
Okay. So before I got to the actual effectiveness of their plan, my thought was, did the teachers have a strong understanding of why this was happening?
Exactly.
And I think she would have got some better buy-in if they understood. And, based on the case study, I'm not sure how much of that happened, but if maybe she had sent out Whitaker survey first and got some data from that and how involved they feel like they are in the decision-making process, and if they have a voice in that, then they may have been a little bit more willing, especially this third grade team. But then also the video experience. So I have actually used that with a teacher, and it was very effective. And I didn't watch the video, it was just her watching it. And I think if these teachers see their kids responding to the instruction, it's more about the kids in their classroom rather than somebody else evaluating them. So I think that video process is going to make the instructional process effective. And I do like that Donna added, okay, but you also have to have a suggestion on how to improve, because they're just like, well, we're just going to write down all things we did good. But in that way, they might find something that they can improve on. And then they're going to adjust their instruction because of it, and that's going to make it more effective. And like Megan, I talked about professional development as well. And that comes from Hammond when we did research for the APTEL. If they get that deeper understanding, then student instruction can only improve. And I think that's all I've got.
All right. So I also felt like most of you all, in terms of, psychology teaches that the confused mind says no. So if they don't really know why things are happening, then yeah, you may run into some opposition that is unnecessary if you're just kind of clear in the beginning. I think the teachers' final plans could have been effective for the instructional process if they promote the reflection, like you said, but it being collaborative. Marzano's big on the peer modeling, and so it offers a way of reflection. And, a lot of times you have the choice of who you want to observe and things like that. If you're modeling from a peer, then you can kind of visualize certain strategies very easily that way. So the stats support that, just go with that. I think structured feedback is another way that the final plans can be more effective. Normally, well, I'll put it like this. Loeb talks about how like feedback can be overwhelming sometimes when it's a whole lot. So what I have seen a lot of times in feedback, even now, is you'll have a glow and a grow, like one particular thing you did well and one thing you need to, or an area they want you to focus on. Sorry, the phone is ringing. I am at work. And so also I thought about the recording aspect, and I know it was mentioned already, but Bender talks about that, teachers can kind of take ownership of their own development when they're looking at their stuff, because it's honestly them. And when it's honestly you, you can kind of set your own goals based on what you have observed when you took the time to look at yourself. And that is the time.
Okay. And as I looked at this and I reflected back on the reading, the principal deciding that at 15 years later, it's about time for teachers to have a say in their observations seemed to make me think that somehow they weren't. So were teachers having a bad experience? Were things happening where they were not included? So it might have been the process or the way it was structured that was the problem, and not necessarily the teacher's effectiveness, if you will. Maybe the communication was the big issue. So I thought about just employing evidence-based practices. Do we even know what that looks like? Do we even think about that when we're teaching? How does that look in action? And then monitoring and adjusting the teaching based on assessments that we talk about so that rigor is included. Also, I like the idea of the peer feedback, and then these high quality PDs that Darling Hammond talked about, so that when you have the PD, it's actual information that the teacher can take directly from the workshop, go right into the classroom, and it's applicable. It's not something you got to go research and figure out how to draw up a whole big plan for. It's something you can just insert immediately. And then in the PLCs, if we're all looking at data we are already sharing, that right there is going to help teachers glean from each other without it being punitive. Well, this is what one teacher is doing versus what I'm doing. Maybe I'll employ that strategy. And we're having those kind of conversations. The biggest thing is trust. Do I trust the people I'm working with, that I can be open and honest so that I can be better? Or am I going to put on a shell because I don't want anybody to know that I don't know? So that was my reflection. Well, let's see. Can I get it to go to the next one? Oh, well, didn't want you to see that one. Let's go back. Okay. Here we are. How would the principal be able to evaluate whether the new observation format was working successful for the students?
So I kind of went back to the Marzano 9 high yield strategies, and because that is such a detailed walkthrough reflection, I think it would be very evident that the students were, whether the students were getting it or learning it or not. I also looked at, there was a researcher named Matthew Duffy, and he was big on these observations and reflections, including the students. And what are you looking for from the students to make sure everything in that assessment is impacting them successfully? And like asking, did the students react to the lesson? Who showed understanding, who did not? And then also talked about like diversity and diverse learners, whether they're EC, 504, English language learners, things like that. And looking at just the data from the classroom. So mostly like just watching the kids. So when you're doing these observations, it's not necessarily all about the teacher, it's about how the students are reacting as well. And I think that is beneficial to make sure that the observation format is being helpful, whatever format you're using. I think just watching the students and seeing them, how they're reacting, can give you a clear idea of if it's working or not.
Okay. So when I looked at this question, I thought about the work we had to do when we created our action plan, and how we had to establish those indicators of success. So is that something that took place? Like, did they decide what are our goals, and how are we going to know by looking at it that it worked? So I asked, what is it she was trying to improve with this process? Like Celia, like you said, after 15 years,
Like what?
what do we do? It's 15 years, so what's been happening prior. So I looked at Hattie, what I had found with Hattie, obviously teacher efficacy. And she talked about major implications of teacher efficacy relate to teachers who work with others to seek evidence of their impact on students. So knowing that we're doing all of this to improve student instruction, they need to have that clear understanding. It's not just about them, it's about how are we going to improve the instruction for our kids. So I said that Donna could check that by doing frequent walkthroughs, like Megan talked about, using Marzano's checklist. Are teachers challenging kids? And that was one of the things that, I saw when I was doing these, is that we weren't necessarily challenging kids. And then, is teacher practice changing because of the plan? You know, they put this in place for a reason. So by doing these frequent walkthroughs, Donna should be able to see if anything's changing. And then I thought about data. Did they look at data ahead of time? And are they going to compare it to what it is now? Because if we're not doing that, we don't really know if it's affected student instruction. And then once they compare the data, after the plan has been implemented, they can see what adjustments they would need to make.
All right. So, I believe that the principal would be able to evaluate whether the observation format was working successfully for the students by observing the changes in the practices that are observed. And of course, those Marzano 9 are very, very big indicators of that. He talks about that as well, visible changes, after peer collaboration is a strong indicator if the observation system is working. And of course, walkthroughs and instructional rounds are good ways of doing that. Another way to evaluate whether the observation format was successful for students is also just, monitor the achievement and the growth. You want to look at data. You want to be able to measure where were they, where are they now, now that you've implemented these things. Teacher collaboration goes a long way with that. Ingvarson talks about that. Self-reflection can oftentimes correlate to student outcomes, and the last one, formative assessments, benchmarks, common assessments. It could be things like even portfolios, that track over time. All of those things can just kind of track student performance in a way where it's very easy to see if the instruction is translating to the performance that you're looking for. So, yeah, that's what I think.
Okay. Well, you all didn't leave a lot for me to talk about, but I went back to the literature review, just always going back to thinking about having the end in mind. What is it that we want to accomplish? If you want to know whether it's successful for students, you have to look at data. Beginning of the year, mid-year, end of year, even the previous year, compared to what's happening now with those same students. What growth has taken place? Even if the kids like the teacher, it doesn't mean that the kids are growing. So you got to be able to separate the personal from the practical. What is the pedagogy in the classroom? Also looking at observational data. You have to be able to put this evaluation in some numerical format to determine whether growth has happened. And I think you can also talk to students, what has changed in class? It's something different. How are you learning? What do you enjoy most about class? Having them be kind of like a focus group to help the teachers see if what they're employing is really working. A lot of times we don't think about them, but they have input and sometimes very valuable information if we listen carefully. Excuse me. All of this to me is something you have to build over time. That it has to be founded on trust. Even if we don't like what you do, we got to understand why you're doing what you do and know that it's not the gotcha that you all talked about. And so I've been in an instance where we've had a PLC, a teacher from one grade level was doing something that was causing a reduction in grades or achievement for the students in the next grade. And because we had a PLC and it just organically came out, it wasn't even asked. And the teacher said, "Oh, that's why the kids are doing that." And they had this authentic conversation as though nobody else was in the room. And it must have been about 7 or 8 of us. And that was the most beautiful thing. And they changed the method and boom, it was done just like that. So teachers are ready. Okay. That was our last question.
Yeah.
Wow. How are we feeling about that?
Good.
Good.
Very good.
Yes. Saw a
Let's
lot of
see.
real life moments in that case study.
Well, that's my final greeting. I hope you all take that and run with it,
Will do.
especially the two of you who are just going to begin spring break. I'll be
Right.
going back on Monday, so I'll have to get a
Sorry.
break somewhere. Exactly. I'll be thinking about the two of you. What about you, Christopher? You're going to be on
3:30
spring?
today. 3:30 today.
Oh,
That's when it'll start.
boy, y'all got me caught. I must be working at the wrong school. I don't know.
Been a
You've
long
been
time
waiting.
since these kids have been out of school. They were a little crazy.
Well, thank you all so much for allowing me to share in this experience. And I will make sure I download the video and get it to you so that you can complete your Zoom assignment.
Awesome.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Have a good weekend, y'all.
All
Yeah, have a
right.